Welcome to Speaking of Jesus. Each week we hear real people having a real conversation about Jesus and what he means to them. We want to invigorate you to invite Jesus into your everyday conversations too. So, what do you want to say? This is Jessica Bordelot, and I'm here with Dr. Michael Ziegler.
Thanks for joining us. This week, we're sharing Jessica's favorite embarrassing moments about ourselves and trying to laugh at them.
Yeah, this is a reoccurring opening question for you, asking our guests to very publicly share things they're most embarrassed of in front of whoever is listening. I've heard some great stories about other people. I've really enjoyed listening to stories about them.
It's a bonding moment. We bond together in our humanity.
That is a very deep philosophical way of looking at feeling just like an idiot.
Thinking of these embarrassing stories, it's not easy. Sometimes it can be hard to laugh at yourself, but this is a part of what it means to grow up, to be mature, to take yourself a little lighter.
Do you ever listen to yourself speak? People have a phrase they always say or some certain... Do you have one? Do you know what yours is?
I listen to it to try to not have those. I think I was overusing the word so.
Sure.
Because I don't like to say therefore. It sounds a little uppity, so I end up saying so a lot. Therefore, I'm trying to vary it up a bit. So that's what I asked our guest. Tell us about a time when you got a good laugh at yourself.
Hi, my name is Eric, and my story is about the fist-bumping dad.
Hi, my name is Sunita, and the title of my story is Mango Face.
Hey, this is Jessica. I'm lost in Minneapolis.
And I'm Mike, and it's lights out for me. All right, Eric, tell us about the fist-bumping dad.
A couple years ago, my oldest was working at the high school on a weekend for a special band program. I think it's called Music in the Parks. So I met his friends for the first time, and I was asking them questions about school and band and sports, thinking I was connecting with these young guys. My job was to be outside in the parking lot and direct traffic, and I had a walkie-talkie, and I felt like I was making some good impressions. And then about midway through the day, one of my son's closest friends comes out, makes a beeline for me, comes right up to me, and he holds out his fist. And so I bump his fist, and he looks at me, and he just turns his fist upside down and says, "I have batteries for you, for your walkie-talkie." And it was so ridiculous to think that some 16-year-old kid wanted to come out and fist bump a 45-year-old man. And I told my son about this, and he has never stopped laughing about me fist bumping his friends when all he wanted to do was just give me some batteries to the old guy with the walkie-talkie.
You just spurred about 3 stories in my mind, but I'm going to go with my original one. But I've got plenty of ridiculous dad stories. Oh, that's good. Thanks for sharing that, Eric. Okay, Sunita.
I remember growing up being the adult child in the house. My mom had left me with my nephew and my sister at the time. And being the adult that was supposed to be watching the kids, the younger kids, I fell asleep. I took a nap. My nephew, Henry, because we were eating mango, and he took the mango peel and started designing my face. So I had when I woke up from the nap, I had mango peels in my mouth and in my nose. And though I was upset, looking back at it, I was like, that was funny.
When you fall asleep around mischievous kids, you just got to expect that something's bad's going to happen to you. Jessica lost in Minneapolis, and I hope it ends with you getting pulled over by the cops, but we'll listen. Usually your stories involve that.
Okay, Mike, let's just pause here for a second, because you are giving listeners the absolute wrong impression of me. Saying that my stories usually involve a run-in with the law? Come on, that's completely unfounded. I've shared almost 100 stories now. We are almost to our 100th episode, and only 2 of them have been about run-ins with the law.
I suppose those just have stuck with me. You tell the story. It's your story.
So I was leading some things at the National Youth Gathering in Minneapolis a couple summers ago. It's for high schoolers. It's great. It's really fun. So the plan was to do a sound check where I was speaking and then come back in a couple hours for the real thing. And between time, I was going to take a bunch of different forms of public transit to get back to my hotel. I'd eat dinner, change my clothes, fix my hair, all those getting ready things. But I got lost. I got very lost. Here's the rest of the story that I shared with the group. And I'm just like wandering up and down the streets of downtown Minneapolis, pulling my little computer bag on wheels, with all the stuff I needed for the day. Looking around, looking at signs, trying to find where I'm going, just walking and walking. And I spent so long that eventually I had to ask for help. So there's a guy who was wearing like an official looking uniform, like he worked for the city, like a construction crew with him. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm really lost. I've got this map, but it's not helping me. I don't know where to go. He's like, oh, I'll help you. He flags down a city bus, not at a bus stop, in the middle of the road. He stops this bus, walks me to the door, and he tells the driver, now she needs to get here. Will you tell her when she gets to this stop so she knows to get out? And I'm like, oh, this is so embarrassing. And I walk up the steps, and it was all businessmen. I don't know if it was like executives ride free day or something, but they're all in their tailored suits with their computer bags looking all fancy. And I'm like all windblown and sweaty. And I'm pulling my bag up the steps, sitting in the front seat. Oh, and I just sat there. I'm like mortified. It was so embarrassing. And I just started laughing because I didn't know what else to do, which probably made me look like more of an idiot. But there I was.
Very good. Mine was lights out. I was in the military, deployed to the Middle East at an undisclosed location, and not in harm's way, but technically in a combat zone. And I had been working with the chaplain there on base about being a part of a Bible study. They had one in the past, but they had stopped for some reason. So I was like, hey, I'll lead a Bible study. And I was not a pastor yet. I was going to go to the seminary a couple years later, but so I was interested in this kind of thing. And we had made announcements on base and let everybody know this was happening. And the chaplain said, there's this room off to the side in the mess hall. And it was just a big tent, and it's kind of set up temporarily. And I remember coming into the tent that night where everybody, the whole tent's filled with guys in their fatigues and M16s, and they're having their chow Sunday night. And I think I even made an announcement like, hey, we're going to be having Bible study over here in this other room if you want to join us. And, they kind of shake their heads, and a few people come and join. We get into this side room that they had sectioned off for us, and it's all dark. And I'm looking around for the light switch, and I found one on the corner, and I flip it on and flip it off and flip it on, flip it off. So, the bulb's burnt out or something. But as I'm flipping it on and off, I hear this commotion in the mess hall. Like there's some kind of air raid or something, and people are getting up and standing up and figuring out what's going on. And I look out and I realize that I had been turning the lights on and off in the mess hall with all the guys. And I came out and apologized, and so much for being the light of the world here. All right. Well, thank you for sharing those stories. Those weren't too bad. Those weren't too embarrassing. So what do you think? How can laughing at ourselves do us good?
First of all, it just helps us not take ourselves too seriously, right? I mean, I think we've all met people that don't have a very good sense of humor, and they also seem to be a little bit overconfident in themselves. So there's something about humor and humility that go hand in hand.
If you can laugh at yourself, you are somehow recognizing that you're not the center of the universe.
For a brief shining moment, right?
In a tough situation, you can make fun of that situation and not take it too seriously. At least for me, it helps calm my nerves.
Take some of the pressure off. I think another thing it does is if people are having to bear with you with your ridiculousness, I think it helps you appreciate them more too. That makes me feel grateful. How might laughing at ourselves do us harm or be taken too far?
If you remember the old Back to the Future movie, George McFly, the father, when he went back when he was a young man in high school, and he was constantly bullied, and his response to being bullied was to be in on the joke and laugh.
Yeah, kind of half-hearted, though.
So he became the butt of the joke. He laughed it off, but actually it just perpetuated. He became the joke boy, right? He was the guy who could be bullied, and he wouldn't do anything about it. And it's humiliating. And I remember in high school, there was a period of time where I had a group of guys where I postured myself as the clown. Not that I did anything funny, but that they would do things funny for them at me. But it actually perpetuated sort of a toxic relationship.
If they're not having fun with you, if they're actually deriding you and insulting you or stripping you of your dignity, that's not a good time to laugh. Because like you were saying, the George McFly phenomenon, that's just going to encourage Biff. And he's not doing it because he's your friend. He's dehumanizing himself because he's treating you this way. And it's not funny anymore.
Yeah, I can laugh at myself by myself. But laughing at myself with a group of people is completely different.
And I was going to say, it makes you an easy target to be picked on.
Okay, I'm going to stop the conversation for a second here. Jessica, you give me a hard time about my occasional references to Back to the Future, the movie.
If it was occasional, I don't think I'd say anything. I would say constant references. So I can think of at least 5 or 6 times.
As often as you get pulled over by the cops.
Twice as much.
Okay. You heard Eric brought it up. It wasn't me. It was Eric here. And it's clear this movie is full of so much great wisdom. Reverend Dr. Eric Herman bringing up one of my favorite movies into our conversation.
Yeah, I think if the relationship with the people is strong, then from a place of confidence and security, you can laugh and they can laugh with you, and it can actually be a fond memory and something that strengthens a relationship. If that relationship is tenuous, it's not going to necessarily help.
There's got to be that firm foundation of love and acceptance underneath it to make it possible. I have a group of friends, and there's one guy, almost every story he tells is a self-deprecating, humorous story. It's not like self-hate direct toward him, but it's just kind of, again, this joy of not taking himself too seriously. And it is so funny, and we laugh not at him, but with him, because we can all relate.
Yeah, you identify with it, right?
Yeah, so I guess if the people that are laughing with you are identifying with you in the situation, that's a good key to this is healthy. As in your own personal experiences, you learn to laugh at yourself. What is it that makes it more or less difficult for you to laugh at yourself?
If I'm in control of the laughter, like if I'm telling the stupid story of something stupid that I did, then I can laugh. Everyone's laughing because I'm controlling the story and I'm telling you which parts I want you to know. But if everyone around you is just laughing and you're just kind of sitting in a pile of humility, that's hard to laugh at then.
That's a fine line for me personally, being able to laugh at myself when I am doing something silly or ridiculous, to be secure enough in who I am in Jesus that it's okay if I look like a clown to other people. And that's hard.
Well, let's bring this around to the prophet Jonah. This is our 3rd episode looking at this short little book of the Bible. It's only 4 chapters.
Some people describe Jonah as a comedy. The events are true, it's accurate, it's historical, it really happened, but the way or the style in which it's told is like a comedy because the main character, Jonah, is made to look ridiculous by his own words and actions. So, for example, Jonah tries to run from God, who's everywhere. Ridiculous, right? He's pouty about delivering God's message of grace when he's been shown grace.
Yeah, Jonah is supposed to be God's prophet, God's courageous spokesman to the world. And instead he complains, he runs away, he's kind of whiny. He whines about God being too merciful, too forgiving. Personally, I'm not sure that makes it a comedy because I think it's too sad and too serious. Yeah, to be defined as a comedy. But
yeah, and we'll talk about that more next week. Probably better said it's a satire than a comedy. Hopefully it can come to a point where you can laugh at his behavior, especially if you're an insider. If you listen to this and remember that it's likely Jonah writing about himself, or at least that he told this story to somebody and they wrote it down later. So he's sharing his own embarrassing moments, and that maybe makes it a little more laughable.
This story of the prophet, his behavior is the most unprophet-like behavior. He's not following along the path that the people of God have been called to follow. He does exactly the opposite. And the situation that he gets himself into is on the border of absurd, so much so that this ends up being the place where people focus on, could he possibly be swallowed by a fish? Well, of course, anything can happen when God's in charge of things. The bigger point is God is starting to reveal something about himself in contrast to people who should know better. His prophets who speak his word should also carry his heart. Jonah seems to exhibit completely the opposite of all of these things. You learn more about God in that story because he stands out in contrast, and you learn more about the tendencies of all of us, that God is far more patient and loving and generous. Even if we're called to serve the church full time, we can often be far less joyful and generous than the one who's called us to do these things.
Yeah, the other day I was talking with Eric about the Book of Jonah, and you said that the other books written by prophets were things that God was telling people. The Lord saith, so saith the Lord, but this one, Jonah's sermon is just a few words, and the whole book is about the story of Jonah. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, it's sitting right in the middle of a collection of prophetic books. The Jewish people call them the Book of the 12. There's 12 minor prophets. And right in the middle is a prophetic book that has really no prophecy in it. It's a story about a prophet and about the God who calls him. And everything is jumbled, and it's not what you expect. And you're right, it's a very short, we hear only a few words from him, and it's a very short sermon. Most effective sermon in history, I think. It's maybe 3-4 words, and the entire town converts.
In the Hebrew language, I think it's just 5 words. We'll hear that here in a minute. Sunita, what's your reaction to this, to thinking of Jonah as comedy?
No, when I was reading it towards the end, when Jonah got upset over the fact that God wasn't trying to punish the people of Nineveh, he gets upset over the fact that the plant that was covering him, right, has died, and God was telling him, so would you rather, why are you upset over the plant, and you want me to, I guess, get rid of the people of Nineveh? And I just sat there and I laughed. I was like, yeah, that is ridiculous, Jonah. That was where I saw the comedy coming to play for me. I was like, oh, that's silly.
I think it's profound that we have in our canon of Scripture a book like this that really is a comedy, and it. Sometimes people make fun of Christians, and we're sometimes the butt of jokes in popular culture. But what's beautiful is that we don't need other people to do that for us. We've got one in our own book, and others too. But this one, I think, shines the brightest. That it helps us laugh at ourselves. Eric spent a lot of time studying Martin Luther. Maybe you could comment on this, but I've been reading Luther's lectures on Jonah. It's from one of his works, volume 19. But he says things like Jonah is a pleasant and a wonderful account. And he comments on God's wonderful attractiveness, how God toys with, winks at, played with Jonah in a gentle, fatherly way to get him to give up his anger. So those are some of the things that Luther said about this. Eric, you want to comment on that at all?
That's a theme when Luther's looking at these stories in the Bible. It's almost like when he's interpreting them at, how you watch a movie and you break the fourth wall where you're turning it aside and you look at the audience. And he feels like he can do that. The characters in the story, Jonah is not laughing, or Abraham or any of the people that he looks at. They take it with deadly seriousness with what God is doing to them. But because Luther knows the outcome and how God is, what his true character is like, he's able to see the fatherly goodness in these actions from a little bit of a distance. And he brings that up all the time. He talks about God playing with his saints, and the examples he cites are like God wrestling Jacob, God, sort of attacking Moses in the wilderness, and you wonder, how is this play? But Luther sees God as kind of exuding joy in all of his work. He loves his saints, and they are his children. And if any of you have had children and have teased them a little bit, not to be cruel, but just to have fun, sometimes they can get really irate. And of course, you laugh all the more, and eventually you end up having maybe a lesson that comes out of it. So that's kind of what Luther's thinking. He's describing, you have two choices. Either God is an angry judge who's just tearing into his saints, or he's a loving father who's having a little play and he's teaching through games.
I like that. And even in terms of like God being that father that is like teasing, and sometimes you tease until you get them so upset. When I felt like towards the end, he was teasing Jonah by illustrating like the plants compared to the people of Nineveh. And then Jonah, I think he asked Jonah, like, are you going to be angry over a plant? And then Jonah said, like, yeah, I'm angry, even to death or something, like saying I'm so mad that I want to die because I'm mad. And God is like, oh, so you can be angry over this plant, but then you want me to get rid of the people of Nineveh. You want me to show compassion to a plant, but then get rid of the people of Nineveh.
Well, good. We'll talk more about this. I want you to have the experience of just hearing this, and I love that language, this account of God playing with his saints, of teasing his children in a gentle, fatherly way. And I think it's even more powerful if we If we follow Jesus and we see this as a real story, this is actually stuff that happened, then it means that at some time Jonah had to share this story with other people. And so even though he ends the book angry, it's clear that he came to be able to laugh at himself when he was being ridiculous. And there's this one author, actually Eric recommended this book by Philip Carey. It's a commentary on Jonah. He says that we must be willing to identify with the ridiculous prophet ourselves, otherwise we miss the point of the joke. So listen to this middle section of Jonah, chapter 2, verse 10 through 4:4, and see if there's a word or a phrase that gets your attention. And the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah out onto dry land. And the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out to her the message that I am going to speak to you." So Jonah arose and went to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was a great city belonging to God, a walk of 3 days. And on the first day, Jonah entered in and he called out, "Yet in 40 days, Nineveh is about to be overturned." And the people of Nineveh believed God. They trusted God. And they declared a fast. And they put on sackcloth, all of them, from the greatest to the least. When the message reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, took off his royal robes, and covered himself with sackcloth, and sat down in ashes. And he issued a proclamation in Nineveh, "By the decree of the king and his nobles, people and animals, both herds and flocks, no one is to taste anything, neither be given anything to eat or water to drink. But let man and beast both be covered in sackcloth, and let everyone urgently call on God. And let them turn, each of them, from their evil ways and from the violence of their hands. Who knows? God may yet turn and change his verdict, and turn from his fierce anger so that we will not perish." And God saw what they did, how they turned from their evil way. And God changed his verdict about the evil that he had threatened to do to them, and he did not do it. But this was evil to Jonah, a great evil. And he burned with anger. And he prayed to the Lord his God, "Lord, this is the reason why I fled to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and changing your verdict about evil. Now, O Lord, take my life from me, because it's better for me to die than to live." And the Lord said to Jonah, "Is it good for you to be angry?" Shortest sermon, most effective sermon in the world, and then the aftermath of it. So what was a word or phrase that stood out to you just listening to it that time?
I was going to say everything that Jonah says, in contrast to how the story is being told, and especially how you read it. He is a Scrooge. He sounds like a grump. I mean, God sounds like Fred, his nephew from Christmas Carol, and it's a bah humbug approach the whole way through. Everything he says is down, and he doesn't even offer the possibility of repentance. He just tells them the bad news.
Yes.
And that's it.
Yep, that's exactly what stood out to me. So it's like he came and he said, you're going down, right? And then he just leave it as that. Even though he know that God is merciful, he just tells him, you're going down. And then that was it.
Jessica, what about for you?
That the king sat down in ashes.
For me, it's the word overturned. that Jonah is given to preach. I love the double meaning there, that he apparently doesn't get the joke yet. Okay, Eric, tell us more about everything Jonah says.
No, I'd like to think about that overturned. Some of our jokes are a play on words, right? You have a word that has a double meaning.
It's the same word that is used of Sodom and Gomorrah. What happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? It can mean destroyed, and that's how sometimes it's translated. But it has this other shade of meaning where it can just mean changed, transformed. And so, apparently God he said, I'm going to give you this sermon, and we don't know if Jonah, what he did, maybe shortened it or whatever, but apparently these are God's own words that Jonah is saying. And I could just see Jonah, this is why he's so mad, is God got him on a pun.
Right. Right. I mean, it's like
it's got a double meaning.
Jesus does this with Nicodemus, right? He says he must be born again, and it seems silly to Nicodemus. How do I crawl back into my mother's womb and be born a second time? In Greek, the word again can also mean from above. And so, clearly Jesus is not saying this absurd thing. He's playing off of this term again, that is being born from God, from above. And when he realizes that, then something beautiful happens.
Yeah, and that's so that the joke's on Jonah. He thought he was going to be the second Sodom and Gomorrah preacher who was going to come and this city would be destroyed. But in fact, it was overturned on the other meaning, as in changed, saved, redeemed. Sunita, say more about what was it about Jonah's character and demeanor?
Yeah, so I echo everything you all just said, but tying into that is with his character and demeanor, so he came thinking that he's delivering the bad news, right? I mean, even when I read it, I was like, man, that's just so harsh. But not knowing that, just the fact that the king believed, right? The king could have not believed. The king could have said no, and then Jonah would, what he thought he was coming to deliver would have happened. But just the fact that God showed up revealed the meaning of actually what he sent Jonah to do.
No, I used a different translation for the word. It's usually God repented from the evil that he had threatened to do. I'm using a translation from Dr. Reed Lessing. He wrote a commentary from Concordia Publishing House on the Book of Jonah, and that's how he translates it. It's in a legal sense. The word in Hebrew can be used in a legal sense like that, so it's a verdict against something. So again, it's not like God is changing his character or he's repenting of evil or something like that, but it's evil in the sense of disaster, of bringing evil upon evil that God does in a completely just way. But he has the prerogative and where and when he chooses, he can change that verdict. He can just do otherwise. And he's got the freedom to do that in his mercy. And so that's why Dr. Lessing translates it as he changed his verdict.
Well, and that's what seems to drive Jonah crazy, right? He says this is the reason. We don't hear that in the first chapters, why he left. We could just guess maybe he's afraid or he's a bad prophet and he doesn't like his job or he just wants to vacation in Tarshish. It's the fact that he knows that it is God's character to change the verdict, as you said. And which direction does God constantly change the verdict? When that word is used, it's almost always God, like you said, from evil or from the bad thing that he had said he was going to do. He turns away from that, and it's grace. Isn't that crazy? The prophet of God can't stand this thing about God's character, that he's gracious to those who don't deserve it. You have to laugh, otherwise you'd cry. It's so ridiculous.
Because he has that mindset of us versus them. So it's like, oh, if it's me, it's okay. Be gracious to me, God. But no, how dare you be gracious to them? Like me versus them.
Let's talk about that part, though, that God repented from the evil he was going to do. Because maybe it's just in the translation in English, but that doesn't match up with the rest of the rest of Scripture to describe God's nature. He doesn't cause evil. He doesn't bring evil. There's nothing evil in him. He doesn't tempt us. He loves us. He has wrath against sin, but that's not evil. That's righteous wrath.
No, you're right. I used the word too quickly there. I mean, the word evil, it's often translated as evil in the Old Testament, actually is a more general word that can just mean a disaster or a bad thing. In that sense, the word evil isn't a moral statement. It's a statement about whether something's going to flourish or whether something's going to go south. And so God has said he's going to destroy something, obviously for righteous reasons. He's laid that out at the beginning. The wickedness of Nineveh has come up before him. But then he has diverted away from the intended disaster that he was planning on, like he's done with Egypt and Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's the thing. I think you're right. It's not that God is the cause of evil, but he certainly is in control of things. It's not like when bad things happened, God was sleeping or not paying attention that day. So he has his reasons. Big surprise is not that God punishes wicked people, but that he forgives them. That's the thing that one doesn't predict. That's the kind of mentality that seems to be being overturned in Jonah by identifying God's character as one who changes his verdict from disaster to grace.
The other minor prophets, they rejoice in this fact that God is the one who relents, who changes his verdict about evil, about disaster. And I think even the prophet Micah specifically uses that same language, that he's the God who relents, who changes his verdict. And now this is the thing that's making Jonah just irate.
Well, and we're all lost if God doesn't, right? If God doesn't change his verdict on unrighteousness, then eventually that falls on us. And that's part of Jonah's problem too, because he thinks as being part of the chosen people, he's exempt from that disaster.
What are you getting to know more deeply about this God revealed to Jonah and to us?
He is a merciful God. Salvation through Jesus Christ, right? He could have, we are so wicked. We're terrible people, but he loved us so much that he sent his son. He's a God of double meaning.
Yeah, it's that movement of God who takes what is evil and turns it to good, like he did with Joseph's brothers, like he does ultimately at the cross. The cross is a curse. It is a disaster. It is evil, and yet God overturns it for good.
When he was in the belly of the fish and he prayed, even in distress, even in my sin, I'm able to talk to God and he's able to, remove me from that situation and show me so much grace. God is so angry with him, but Jonah saw it as it was a prayer of thanksgiving to God, saying that God had saved him. So sometimes we might be in a situation and we're like, man, God, why put me in this? But really, we're in that situation because there's something at the end waiting for, and God's saving us from something that could have been.
Yes, we talked about that in the last episode. Can a fish be a type of Christ? Because he saved him? Because, he took the evil into himself and saved you? And Mike said maybe, Eric, can a fish be a type of Christ?
Well, in the early church, ichthus, the Greek word for fish, was a symbol of Jesus, right? You see it on the back of your cars. There was a great poem, very, very short poem by a pastor about Jonah. In the dark at the bottom of the world, it was impossible to discern where the prophet ended and the great fish began. Only heaven could tell, for their prayers were the same. Deliver me, O Lord, from this vile, distasteful thing.
So the poem that Eric read is called Jonah, and it was written by Pastor Jeffrey Stone.
What a great poem. You're listening to it and you're thinking maybe this is Jonah's prayer. It's the fish's prayer. And Jonah's prayer is the same as the fish's prayer. The fish is praying, deliver me. So it's in the perspective. Jonah might have been grossed out by being inside the slimy guts of an ocean creature, but the fish probably wasn't too happy about it either.
Yeah, the fish took a drowning man into himself to save his life. Doesn't it seem so symbolic of what Jesus did for us? Taking our dirty, suffocating, dying selves into himself and then covering us, giving us breath, life. I don't know, it seems like such a specific foreshadowing. Maybe that's the sign of Jonah that Jesus talked about in the Gospels. Maybe that's what he meant.
Well, it goes with what you've been saying in these last few episodes, that the fish is a vessel of God's salvation, not God's judgment. That's important. It doesn't seem that way at first, but it is. It's saving Jonah. This is just another example of how the short story of Jonah is so much more than what it appears at first glance. There are layers and layers and layers of meaning.
I think what Jessica was mentioning too about the experience of going down and then being raised up, That's sort of a key from, like, for instance, Luther's perspective on the Bible is that sort of a key to God's character, that he must first, and he chooses to first bring down so that he can bring up. And he's got lots of quotes about this. One that comes to mind, he says, in order that God might form us into that which is pleasing to him, he must first destroy our present form and thoughts. And that sounds harsh, but its point is that our sin and our disease is so virulent that it has to be destroyed so he can make us into something new. But God, this is the relationship of long gospel, that God destroys or tears down our old idols, things that we hold dear, so that we can hold on to him again. That's his character. It's if you're only on Good Friday or Easter Saturday, you're wondering what God was up to by letting his Messiah die. But on Easter morning, you realize how it all worked out.
Well, let's bring it back full circle. How is this helping you, in a good news kind of way, laugh at yourself a little bit more?
It's such a sad story of Jonah's struggle and the trouble he gets himself into. And it's no fun to feel that way. It's no fun to be a cranky curmudgeon who can't see good in anything, right? And this poor city of... I don't know that it's a happy story. Like it ends well because it's a salvation story.
It's an open-ended comedy, right? I mean, we know, like, I love the Christmas Carol analogy now that I hear Michael read it like Scrooge. We know how that one ends too. He goes through all these sorts of self-revealing experiences. And then at the end, and almost every movie play version that I've seen of this, Ebenezer is a giggly kid at the end. He's just laughing and jumping and bouncing around in his pajamas. It stops right before then. And maybe that's purposeful. I don't know. Maybe that's an artistic moment. Biblically, we know actually what the full ending of all this. Jesus even claims the story of Jonah for himself. He'll take the sign of Jonah, just as Jonah was in the belly for 3 days, so the Son of Man will rise again after 3 days. I mean, what is that except the absolute comedy and joy of the thing?
I see. I've come to understand how it's funny to laugh at Jonah in the story, but I don't know. When it comes to my own salvation, I think it just reminds me of my human nature and how I tend sometimes, right, act like I'm better than other people because, I'm a Christian, I know Jesus Christ, you don't, and it forces me to look inward, right? Sunita, what are you doing? How are you treating other people? How are you judging other people? How are you saying that other people deserve the wrath of God because they're like this and they're like that? So it's just a lot of self-reflection. Instead of laughing at myself, it's like, okay, when have I been a Jonah? Right? Or when have I acted like Jonah to others?
Going back to what Eric said about this nature, this sinful nature that is in us that is so terrible that it needs to be destroyed, in fact. And it can't live. That's how awful it is. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is laugh at it because it strips it of its power. This sin nature in me that wants to do just like you said that you do. I put myself over others. I think I'm better than everybody else because I'm a Christian, blah, blah, blah. But when I laugh at that of myself, it strips it of its power.
Yes.
I love the Book of Jonah because it gives me the freedom to laugh at myself. It liberates me from my own issues, helps me laugh at them, helps me see my pettiness, my pride as ridiculous. And if it's laughable, it's no longer as much as a force, because I know that underneath all of this is a bedrock of God's steadfast love for me. And not just for me, for Jonah, for the people of Nineveh, and even for their cattle, which we're going to be talking about next week. That's the foundation of love and commitment that I need, that we all need, to be able to take ourselves a little less seriously, to be able to laugh at ourselves when we're being ridiculous.
I agree. It's much easier to laugh at myself if I'm surrounded by people who like me, who accept me the way that I am. If I know that my embarrassing moment isn't going to make them like me less or think less of me, it makes me secure, like I'm comfortable enough to laugh too. But if my value, like my worth is in question, then the stakes are too high. It's serious, it's scary, it doesn't make me laugh.
And that's the difference between laughing at yourself in the way that Jonah would have us do, and he's not trying to get us to hate ourselves or to devalue ourselves, but to see ourselves more clearly as sinners in the hands of a gracious and merciful, loving Father who loves us regardless. And that's why we can laugh at ourselves. We don't have to be scared that God will love us less because we aren't perfect. God didn't stop loving the wayward people of Nineveh. He didn't stop loving disobedient, rebellious Jonah. He called them to faith. He called them to repentance. He promised to send them his Messiah, a Savior that would be perfect and still love them even when they're less than.
And the same thing goes for all of us. I'm just like Jonah. I'm petty and whiny and don't want to do stuff too. I mean, it's not just about him, it's about me. We can all just leave behind our puffed up self-importance because we aren't less valuable when we make fools of ourselves. Because our worth and our value come from God, from his love for us. And we're given that by grace through faith in Jesus. We don't earn it by doing everything right or playing it cool or knowing just the right thing to do. It's given to us by grace through faith. Sin is certainly nothing to laugh at, but our own inflated sense of dignity totally is. But we can acknowledge that. We can acknowledge it boldly because our worth is in Christ.
In Jesus, God loves you. He accepts you. It's a safe place. So don't be afraid to laugh at yourself.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. You can listen to past episodes on our website, jesuspodcast.org. Hey, and on that same website, you can click Contact Us, and you can send us a message. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
You can find our past episodes on any podcast platform. Just search Speaking of Jesus. And if you're able, go ahead, leave us a rating and a review. We read every word. I want to invite you to our Facebook group. It's called Speaking of Jesus. You can see pictures of our guests each week and stay in the loop.
Next week, we'll talk about satire. That's the technique of using irony, wit, humor to make a point. And the Book of Jonah is full of it. We pray that this week's podcast has encouraged you in your faith and has invigorated you to speak of his love into the lives of those around you. See you next week. As always, we'll hear from Dr. Ziegler in a real conversation between real people speaking of Jesus. What do you want to say? Still embarrassed thinking about that story.
It humanizes you.
I don't need any more humanizing.
Yeah.